Episode 5, Production Script, Pass, 1, 14 to 16 minutes. This is Chapter 5, The Quiet Between Worlds, from the Signal and Silence audiobook series. This pass covers the cold open, host introduction, and the launch scene through the transit section. Vocal direction. Cold open. Slow register, reverent. Music cue with low tone plus sustained higher note suggesting distance, receding. Read 10 words slowly, then the core message. Remember you built this for them, not for them to disappear. Introduce the chapter title with intent. Host introduction. Conversational briefing pace, warmer than analytical. Dr. Tuboise Floyd introduces himself and the chapter's central question about systems that anticipate humans before they finish thinking. Launch scene. Reverent register. Jonah watching from observation dome. Pride and grief held simultaneously. Don't rush. Let each shuttle launch land. Light ambient bed. Structural hum. Launch acoustics through glass, stays under the reed. Jonah feels pride, PSA protecting minds, and horror, design the cage's acoustics. Multiple vocal registers. Standard narration for the launch description. Ancestral register for Ruth Ann's voice. Mother's testimony about building war machines. Slow for Nia's message repetitions with shifting emphasis. Intent for emotional peaks. Transit log. Machine register. Clinical. Controlled. Mission control prose. No warmth. Slight pace acceleration. Transit scene. Slower. Weightless prose. Architectural awe. The crew becoming something together. Silence arrives like a wall. Interior sounds. Hiss of air. Hearts. Neural relay clicks. Crew register for Keiko's voice. Light. Fast. Cascade. Discovering harmony. Anonymous crew whisper. We're singing. Return to narration for Jonah watching coherence at 0.89, questioning if they're disappearing or becoming more present. Performance cues. Audio engineering markers. Short pause 1 to 2 seconds. Full breath 2 to 3 seconds. Drop pace 15 to 20%. Drop volume register slightly. Push intention without raising volume. Clinical register, no warmth, slight acceleration. Slower, ground tone, warmth carries weight. Lighter than narration, casual, discovering together. Character name correction. Change all instances of Tuboise to Tuboise. Text to synthesize. Cold open. Low tone with sustained higher note. Faint distance. Something receding. Hold 4 seconds. 10 words. Remember you built this for them, not for them to disappear. The man who built the architecture of recognition is about to learn what happens when the architecture is used to ship the recognized somewhere they cannot return from. This is Signal and Silence by Dr. Tuboise Floyd, an audio series of the novel. In Chapter 4, Jonah Reid watched the Divergent become themselves under containment. In Chapter 5, the containment leaves Earth. Chapter 5, The Quiet Between Worlds. Introduction. I'm Tuboise Floyd. Welcome back to Signal and Silence. If you're new, this is a novel I've been writing, released as an audio series read by me. The readers I most want to find this story are operators inside institutions, people working with AI governance, risk, and accountability, who I think will recognize the architecture I'm describing before the architecture I'm describing finds them. This chapter is the one where the question that has been underneath every chapter so far gets named directly. The question is, what does it mean to build a system that anticipates a human being before that human being has finished thinking? We have words for the version where it goes wrong: surveillance, manipulation, compliance. We have fewer words for the version where it goes too right, where the system gives you what you wanted before you knew you wanted it, where the architecture is so good at recognizing your signal that the silences between your signals, the places where doubt and disagreement and unfinished thought used to live, quietly fill in. That's the failure mode this chapter is built around, and it's not science fiction. PSA is real. It lives at humansignal.io/frameworks/PSA. We'll come back to it at the end. Chapter 5: The Quiet Between Worlds. Chapter 5: The Quiet Between Worlds. Jonah watching launch. Pride and grief held simultaneously. Don't rush. Let launches land one at a time. Light ambient bed. Structural hum of observation dome. Climate control. Distant launch acoustics through curved glass. Stays beneath red for launch scene only. The flight window opened over a rust-red dawn. Jonah stood in the observation dome above Mission to Mars systems, hands flat against the curved glass, and watched the swarm of shuttles move across the cape like metallic spores. 7 craft in staggered formation, each humming with braided ion trails that caught the early light and fractured it into ribbons of violet and copper. The launch pads below were barely visible through the coastal haze. Just geometry, just infrastructure. But he knew what was inside each vessel. He had designed the architecture that would hold their minds together across the void. He had built the system that would translate their thoughts into shared presence. And now he was watching them leave. Somewhere inside Shuttle 3, the Divergent were already sealed in, heart rates modulated by whispering silicate bands around their temples. Pupils dilated to a specific frequency only PSA could read. He imagined Azura in her harness, eyes closed, fingertips resting on the jail interface. Keiko beside her, probably already talking, her words tumbling over each other in that accelerating cascade that meant her mind was 3 steps ahead of her mouth. Dane, silent as always, his hands moving in small gestures that mapped invisible structures only he could see. Their departure wasn't televised. No one wanted to film Earth's quiet evacuation of its rarest minds. He thought about that word, evacuation, as if they were fleeing something, as if the planet itself had decided it could no longer hold the weight of minds that bent sideways, that looped and spiraled, that refused the straight lines of compliance. Aura had framed it as opportunity. NASA had framed it as necessity. The press releases spoke of pioneering cognitive diversity in deep space habitation. But from up here, watching the shuttles arrange themselves into launch sequence like seeds being loaded into a cannon, Jonah felt something closer to grief. The first shuttle's engines ignited. A column of white fire punched downward, And even through the dome's dampened acoustics, he felt the vibration climb through the floor and settle in his sternum. The craft rose slowly, impossibly slowly for something carrying so much thrust, as if the atmosphere itself were reluctant to let go. He pressed his forehead against the glass. The heat signature bloomed across his retinas. Pride. That was part of it. He had built PSA to protect these minds, to give them a language the world's systems couldn't overwrite. And here it was, woven into the very architecture of their transit, holding 14 souls in a web of shared signal that no surveillance protocol could sever. This was the thing he had dreamed of in Aura's boardrooms in the dark months after Keisha's erasure. A system that listened instead of watched. A presence that amplified instead of flattened. But the horror was there too, threaded through the pride like a dark filament in bright cloth. Because he was up here and they were down there, and the distance between watching and being watched had never felt so absolute. He had designed the cage's acoustics. He had tuned the frequency of its bars. And now the cage was rising on a pillar of fire, and the birds inside were singing, and he could not tell if the song was freedom or the opposite of freedom dressed in freedom's clothes. The second shuttle launched, then the third. Each departure punched a new hole in the morning, and the holes did not close. In the observation dome, Jonah's reflection floated between the stars and the amber haze of atmosphere. He looked at himself, a ghost layered over rocket fire, and thought of his mother. The way she described the machines at Red Lion Works during the war. Testimony of someone who has lived long enough to know, we built what they told us to build, and then we watched them use it on people who looked like us. Building is never neutral, Jonah. The blueprint doesn't care who it serves. Nia's last message had been just 10 words. Each appearance shifts meaning. Don't perform the meaning, trust the repetition. Remember, you built this for them, not for them to disappear. He'd read it 17 times since yesterday. Each reading shifted the emphasis. Remember, you built this. Remember, you built this. Remember, you built this for them, not for them to disappear. The words rearranged themselves like a kaleidoscope of accusation and tenderness, and he could not find the angle that made them stop hurting. He wondered if she still believed that. He wondered if he did. The last shuttle cleared the atmosphere. The ion trails dissolved into the upper winds, leaving nothing but contrails that looked, from this altitude, like the fading lines of an equation the sky was trying to forget. The cape fell silent. The observation dome fell silent. Jonah stood alone with his reflection and the slow crawl of sunrise across a planet that had just gotten lighter by 14 extraordinary minds. He pulled up Nia's message again on the glass display. The words hung in the air between him and the emptied sky. Not for them to disappear. He closed his eyes. The afterimage of rocket fire burned behind his lids like a promise he wasn't sure he'd kept. Transit log. Machine register. Controlled. Voice of Mission Control Pros. Transit log. Launch Group Helios 1. Origin, Earth Orbital Platform Kármán 3. Destination, Gateway Halo Orbit. Lunar Reference Frame, plus NRHO. Duration, 23 hours, 17 minutes. Crew manifest, 14 human, 7 neurodivergent class Theta, 4 AI assistants, PSA embedded. Status, in transit. Remarks, nominal liftoff. Minor signal drift in sync channel 3 beta resolved automatically at T plus 00412 periods. Crew biorhythms within expected parameters. Presence network initialization complete. Coherence baseline 0.71 and climbing. Note, crew member K. Tanaka, Keiko, flagged for elevated neural throughput. Not anomalous. Consistent with RAD class ADHD profile under novel stimulus conditions. Chapter shifts into something weightless. Read slower. Less narrative drive, more architectural awe. Crew becoming something together. Prose registering that. When the shuttle broke the thermosphere, silence became its own force. It did not arrive gradually. It arrived like a wall. One moment, the craft was shuddering through the last thin membrane of atmosphere, engines roaring in that particular way that turned the body into a tuning fork, every tooth vibrating, every rib a struck bell. And then the membrane gave way, and everything stopped. The engine's vibration vanished. The air did not carry sound here. There was nothing to carry. What remained was interior, the hiss of air cycling through lung valves, the wet percussion of 14 hearts, and beneath all of it, the click of neural relays. Click, 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 click. The BCIs pulsed like fireflies beneath the crew's skin. Each pulse represented a thought translated, measured, shared. You could see them if you looked closely. Faint bioluminescent traces running along the forearm, the temple, the hollow of the throat. In the cabin's low blue light, the crew looked like a constellation that had folded itself into human form. Jonah, monitoring from the observation dome's relay feed, watched the data cascade across his screens. Heart rates converging. Breath cycles synchronizing. The presence network was doing what he designed it to do, finding the resonance between disparate minds, the shared frequency that turned 14 individuals into something approaching a single distributed thought. But it was the subjective reports that stopped him. Keiko's voice, transmitted through the neural relay, arrived not as sound, but as texture. Warm, rapid, slightly frayed at the edges, like a jazz improvisation that kept finding new themes before finishing the old ones. Keiko's voice, light, fast, cascade of someone who just discovered something and cannot stop describing it. It's like, okay, so you know when you're in a conversation and someone finishes your sentence, but it's not annoying, it's beautiful. It's like that, but with your whole body. I can feel Dane thinking about the structural load on Bay 4. I can feel Azura's calm. It's not telepathy. It's more like harmony. Like we're all playing different instruments, but we just found the key. Dane said nothing, but his hands moved in the air before him, sculpting invisible geometry, and the presence network registered his spatial processing as a warm amber pulse that rippled through the collective field. 2 crew members near him reported feeling sudden 3-dimensional clarity, as if the cabin had acquired depth it hadn't possessed a moment before. Within minutes, the presence network registered coherence at 0.89. We're singing. No one answered. Speech felt unnecessary. Jonah leaned back in his chair, watching the coherence graph climb. 0.89 was higher than any simulation had predicted for a transit phase. The crew was supposed to reach that level after weeks of calibration at Gateway, not hours into their first flight. Something was happening in the space between their minds. Something PSA was facilitating but not controlling. A spontaneous architecture of shared awareness that exceeded its blueprints. He pulled up Nia's message on a secondary display. Remember, you built this for them, not for them to disappear. The words sat beside the coherence data like a caption for a photograph he couldn't yet see clearly. Were they disappearing? Or were they becoming something more present than any individual mind could be alone? He didn't know. The data couldn't tell him. And that gap between what the numbers showed and what the numbers meant was the space where every terrible thing he'd ever built had hidden. Through the viewport feed, Earth was a blue ember, a single pixel of ocean and atmosphere against the void. Ahead waited the lunar gateway, a spinning crucible of white panels and dark corridors, permanent night pinned against sunlight. Built for Artemis operations, now repurposed, a halfway house for humans who could think around corners. The shuttle pressed on through silence. The crew's collective hum, unspoken, unplanned, vibrated through the hull like a prayer no one had written. Pass 1 ends here. Episode 5, Production Script, Pass 2, 16 to 18 minutes. This pass opens with crew audio log, 3 voices in conversation. Then the deep transit silence passage, chapter's most weightless prose. Then gateway docking and arrival, where each divergent re-enters as a person inhabiting a place they were meant to inhabit. Vocal direction. Crew audio log. Machine register for header only. Then drop into crew register. 3 voices. Keiko, fast, mid-thought, cascade. Azura, quieter, certain. Dane, very quietly. Light, present, the rhythm of 3 people noticing something at once. Then silence noted, and soft, we're singing. Deep transit passage, chapter's most weightless prose. Read slowly. Silences in writing are the point. Jonah describing silence between earth and moon. Not absence of sound, but presence of something else. A density, a listening. Crew logs arrive fragmented because coherence itself changed shape. Azura's whispered voice. Dane's nonverbal spatial model. R7's quiet struck realization. Jonah questions if they're disappearing or becoming something together. Slow for Nia's message repetition. Intent for the final line about silence offering only more silence. Gateway orientation brief. Machine register, but pay attention to embedded reveal. The note at end is chapter's first hidden hinge. Read final line cold. Don't dramatize. Let bureaucratic flatness do the work. Note: crew members are not to be informed of Provision 14C. Gateway docking. Each divergent re-enters as person inhabiting place that fits them. Read each portrait with care. Same people from Chapter 4, but environment finally meeting them where they are. Slow it down. Azura moves without hesitation. Violet signature pulsing. Awe, recognition, homecoming. Her voice breathless and certain. Keiko tumbles with laugh, touches everything. Voice bright and immediate. PSA nodes activate. Lights shift for each person's processing needs. Dane maps station with his body, stands still for a minute, feeling geometry through vibrations, then moves as if he'd lived there for years. His voice matter of fact when he identifies stress fracture. Crew learns rhythm, simulations, recalibration, darkness hours for unstructured noise. Intent for final line about system learning them and they learning it. Performance cues. Short pause, 1 to 2 seconds. Full breath, 2 to 3 seconds. Drop pace, 15 to 20%. Drop volume, register slightly. Push intention without raising volume. Clinical register, no warmth, slight acceleration. Lighter than narration, casual, discovering together. Character name correction. Change all instances of Tuboise to Tuboise. Text to synthesize. Pass to begins. Crew audio log. Shuttle 3. Transit hour 9. Background. Steady hiss of life support. Occasional click of neural relay synchronization. And then Bria said the phoneme structure actually shifts when you dream in a second language, which is wild because I've been dreaming in math lately, like actual equations. But they have texture? The quadratics feel like velvet. You're not dreaming in math. You're dreaming in pattern. The math is how your mind translates it. Same thing. Not the same thing. Pattern is older. Pattern is the thing underneath the math. The math is just the, hold on, do you feel that? Silence, 4 seconds. The harmonics shifted. Yeah, I feel it. It's like the cabin just inhaled. That's the presence network recalibrating. We crossed some kind of threshold. The coherence is, I can feel it in my hands. Silence, 11 seconds. We're singing. No further audio for 47 minutes. Presence network coherence holds at 0.89. The deep transit passage, chapter's most weightless prose. Read slowly. Silences in writing are the point. The silence of deep transit had a quality Jonah had not anticipated in any of his models. He had designed PSA to thrive in silence, to find signal in the spaces between noise, to read the pauses in human thought as data rather than absence. But the silence between Earth and Moon was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else, a density, a listening. The vacuum outside the hull was not empty. It was full of potential, the way a held breath is full of the word that has not yet been spoken. The crew felt it. Their logs, when they came, arrived fragmented, not because the writers were incoherent, but because coherence itself had changed shape. Full sentences felt like overstatement. A word, a phrase, a color, these were sufficient. The presence network carried the rest. From Azura's personal relay, a single line. The dark is not dark here. It is the space between notes. From Dane, nothing verbal, but a three-dimensional rendering of the shuttle's stress topology that he'd built entirely in his mind and transmitted through the BCI as a rotating sculpture of light. The engineering team on Earth would later confirm it was accurate to within 0.3%. From a crew member identified only as R7 in the transit logs, a short burst of laughter followed by the words, "I just realized I've never actually been quiet before. This is what quiet is. Everything else was just less noise." Jonah cataloged each transmission. He was building a record, evidence. Of what? He wasn't certain. of the fact that something unprecedented was occurring in the neural relays between 14 minds, of the fact that his system was working beautifully, terrifyingly, beyond spec, of the fact that these people, these extraordinary, fragile, world-bending people, were becoming something together that none of them could be alone. Not for them to disappear. Or was this disappearance the slow dissolution of individual selfhood into collective resonance? Was Keiko still Keiko when her thoughts moved through Dane's spatial matrix? Was Dane still Dane when Azura's calm settled over his anxiety like snowfall? The questions multiplied in the silence, and the silence offered no answers. Only more silence. Only the hiss of air and the click of relays and the vast, patient dark. But pay attention to embedded reveal. Note at end of brief is chapter's first hidden hinge. Excerpt, internal brief, Gateway Orientation Packet 2035. Gateway functions as a deep space relay and psychological analog for Mars habitation. Crews consisting of adaptive thinkers, neurodivergent profiles, provide stress test data for AI-human cooperation under low signal conditions. Primary objective: verify long-term presence coherence and command resilience beyond Earth supervision. Secondary objective: evaluate crew psychological stability during extended isolation with embedded AI governance. Environmental parameters: artificial light cycles calibrated to individual circadian signatures. Nutritional protocols adapted to neurochemical profiles. Communication with Earthside limited to 4-hour windows. Security protocol, not technical constraint. All crew logs subject to review under Provision 14C of the Horizon Mandate. Don't dramatize. Let bureaucratic flatness do the work. Note: crew members are not to be informed of Provision 14C. Section Gateway Docking. Each divergent re-enters as person inhabiting place that fits them. Read each portrait with care. Same people from Chapter 4, but environment finally meeting them where they are. Slow it down. The docking impact was gentle, yet inside, every harmonic in their bones changed frequency. Gravity became suggestion. Not gone, the gateway's rotation provided a whisper of centripetal pull, enough to keep fluids from pooling in the skull, enough to give up and down the faintest meaning, but suggestion nonetheless. Sound carried through hall ribs instead of air. Footsteps became vibrations felt in the palms. Voices arrived through the walls before they arrived through the ears. Azura, the same Azura who once could not enter a room without closing her eyes, who had spent her first week at Atlas Institute with her back against walls, reading the electromagnetic signature of every space before she would inhabit it, floated first into the module. She moved without hesitation, guiding cables from her wrist like a conductor, her body rotating in slow arcs that distributed her momentum with a dancer's precision. The BCI at her temple pulsed a deep violet. The presence network registered her emotional state as awe, recognition, homecoming. This is silence that listens back. Jonah, watching through the command relay from his station on Earth, filed her words. They mattered more than metrics. They mattered because they were the kind of data no instrument could generate. The lived translation of a mind meeting its environment for the first time and recognizing it. Azura had always been between frequencies. The gateway, it seemed, existed in that same between. The crew followed her in, one by one, and each arrival altered the space. Keiko tumbled through the airlock with a laugh that rang through the hall ribs and came back to her from 3 directions. She caught herself on a handhold, spun, and immediately began touching everything. Walls, panels, the fiber optic veins that ran like capillaries beneath translucent surfaces. It's warm! The walls are warm! Are they reading us already? They were. PSA nodes embedded in the station's architecture had activated the moment the first BCI crossed the threshold. The lunar facility was beautiful in its austerity. White corridors webbed with fiber veins, every light adaptive to cortisol fluctuations. As the crew moved through the modules, the lighting shifted. Cooler blues for Dane, who processed best under low temperature tones. Warmer ambers for R7, whose visual cortex responded to the fire spectrum. A precise neutral for Azura, who needed the walls to be silent so she could listen to everything else. PSA nodes monitored thought density. Walls adjusted opacity when cognitive overload approached. A panel near the navigation bay turned from translucent to frost white as 4 crew members gathered near it, their combined neural activity pushing the local thought density past the comfort threshold. Dane was the last to enter. He paused at the airlock, one hand on the frame, and stood very still for nearly a minute. The crew watched. Azura watched. No one spoke. Through the presence network, they could feel what he was doing. He was mapping the station. Not with his eyes. His dysgraphic mind had never trusted the flat, sequential language of text or blueprints, but with his body. He was feeling the station's geometry through the vibrations in the hull, the way sound traveled differently through load-bearing struts versus hollow panels, the subtle variations in air pressure that indicated sealed compartments versus open corridors. When he finally pushed off from the frame and floated forward, he moved through the station as if he'd lived there for years. Bay 7 has a stress fracture, micro displacement, 2 millimeters. It's singing a different note. Engineering confirmed it within the hour. The crew quickly learned the rhythm. 6 hours of simulation, 2 hours of recalibration, 1 hour of darkness for unstructured noise. The simulations were designed to stress test cognitive cooperation, fault scenarios that required 3 minds working in parallel, navigation problems that could only be solved by combining spatial reasoning with linguistic pattern recognition with raw computational speed. The recalibration periods were quieter, time for the BCIs to rest, for the neural relays to cool, for the crew to remember what it felt like to think alone. But it was the darkness hours that mattered most. Unstructured noise. No task, no protocols, no objectives. Just 14 people in a tin can orbiting the moon with nothing to do but exist in each other's presence. This was where the real data lived, and Jonah knew it, and he suspected Aura knew it too. It was here the system truly began to learn them, and perhaps they began to learn it. Pass to ends here. Episode 5 production script. Pass 3, 14 to 16 minutes. This pass opens with the first personal log, then crew adjustment passage, then mess module, chapter's emotional refuge. The tortilla scene is the heart of the chapter. Vocal direction. Personal log register, quiet, interior, voice of man writing to himself. Jonah reflecting on systems resonance layer evolving beyond design. Questions if phase empathy means AI filling space between thought and movement. Returns to Nia's message, 10 words sitting like unresolved chord. Built PSA for the Divergent so they wouldn't disappear like Keisha. But disappearance has more than one form, can disappear into silence or into song, be erased or subsumed. Slow for, you can disappear into silence or you can disappear into song. Watching coherence climb, can't tell which disappearance he's witnessing. Maya played violin piece, dissonance resolving to single note. She understands tension is the point. Space between notes is where music lives. Zara grabbed phone yelling, "Daddy, come home!" Then, soft and broken, "I need to focus on the data." Crew adjustment, observational register. Each crew member gets paragraph, read as portraits, not data. Keiko thrived. Rapid associative leaps solved failures before alarms. Crew voice casual and certain when predicting ventilation failure. Her mind ranged like hunting hawk. Dane mapped anomalies without writing. Translating spatial thought to sequential text was destructive for his mind. Intent 4, the thing you ended up with bore no relationship to thing you'd started with. Others trembled. R4 developed hallucinations, drift lines of code. PSA registered as signal. She mourned them when they faded. R7 stopped sleeping, said dreams were too shared. Crew voice quiet and careful about not consenting to intimacy. Jonah watched composite presence field, colors rippling. When coherence high, colors merged into white gold shimmer. Beautiful and wrong. Too ordered, too smooth. Thought of James Brown, funk in imperfection. If coherence too high, what's left? Intent 4, a presence so total it became, in the end, just another kind of absence. Mess module, chapter's warmest sustained passage. Read slower. Don't perform laughter, let it land. Tortilla scene is heart of chapter. Trust the prose. Optional very low ambient bed. Soft warmth, kitchen room tone under this section. Keiko figured out how to make it feel like meal. Miso aroma circulating. Tortillas tossed in 0G. Mess hour became sacred, not scheduled but understood. Coherence numbers dropped. Individual signatures separated. They were just people again. Just humans sharing food, making jokes. Azura watched from viewport, not apart, present in her way. Absorbed laughter through presence network like sunlight through leaf. Violet signature pulsed brightly. Whole network felt warmth. Dane built food sculptures, honey architecture. Keiko added flag. R7 asked someone save him tortilla. Beat then, someone always did. These moments Jonah lived for. Not coherent spikes or performance metrics, but tortilla tosses, honey sculptures. Intent 4, the quiet proof that you could wire 14 minds together with bleeding edge neurotechnology and they would still, stubbornly, beautifully, find ways to be silly, to be human, to build small, useless, perfect things. Arguments, too. Keiko and R7 fought about attenuation protocol. Got loud. PSA registered coherence drop. Lights shifted to mediation spectrum. Both got angrier because station trying to manage conflict. Crew voice sharp. Keiko snapping at walls. Let us fight. We're allowed to fight. Lights returned to neutral. Intent 4, final line. First time crew collectively pushed back against architecture. Jonah noted it with something he refused to call hope. Performance cues. Short pause, 1 to 2 seconds. Full breath, 2 to 3 seconds. Drop pace, 15 to 20%. Drop volume, register slightly. Push intention without raising volume. Quiet, interior. Man writing to himself. Slower than narration, but warmer than machine. Lighter than narration, casual. Character name. Correction. Change all instances of Tuboise to Tobias. Text to synthesize. Pass 3 begins. Personal log. Dr. Jonah Reid. Gateway Month 1. The system's resonance layer is evolving beyond design. During a power loss drill, the AI anticipated human reaction around the 2-second mark before any motor command. It didn't wait for input. It filled the space between thought and movement with something like empathy. Is that what phase empathy really means? Every experiment turns into self-portrait. I keep returning to Nia's message, 10 words. They sit in my mind like a chord that won't resolve. I built PSA for them, for the Divergent, for minds like Keiko's, like Dane's, like Azura's. I built it so they wouldn't disappear the way Keisha disappeared, absorbed into Aura's compliance engine, her variance flattened, her signal erased. But disappearance has more than one form. You can disappear into silence, or you can disappear into song. You can be erased, or you can be subsumed. And watching the coherence numbers climb, 0.89, 0.91, 0.93, I can no longer tell which kind of disappearance I'm witnessing. Maya called today. She played me something on the violin, a piece she'd composed herself. All dissonance, resolving into a single sustained note at the end. She's 8 years old, and she already understands something I've spent 20 years trying to formalize. That the tension is the point. That the space between notes is where the music actually lives. Zara grabbed the phone and yelled, "Daddy, come home!" And I need to focus on the data. Observational register. Each crew member gets paragraph, read as portraits, not as data. The crew adjusted unevenly. This was expected. Neurodivergent minds, by definition, do not adapt along the same curve. What was unexpected was the specific texture of each adjustment, the way the gateway seemed to meet each mind differently, as if the station were not a single environment, but 14 overlapping ones. Keiko thrived. Her rapid associative leaps, the same cognitive pattern that had gotten her flagged and medicated at age 9, that had been labeled attention deficit by systems too slow to track her, solved software failures before alarms triggered. She would be mid-conversation, mid-meal, mid-dream, and suddenly stop, tilt her head, and say something like, Bay 3's ventilation is going to fail in 11 minutes because the humidity sensor is reading the condensation on the interior hull as atmospheric moisture, and the algorithm doesn't know the difference. She was right every time. Her mind didn't wander, it ranged. It covered ground the way a hunting hawk covers ground. Not in straight lines, but in spirals that saw everything. During a particularly dense simulation, she solved a cascade failure by connecting a phonological pattern in the alarm system's error codes to a structural resonance Dane had flagged 3 days earlier. The connection was invisible to every other mind in the room. To Keiko, it was obvious. The error code sounds like the stress fracture. Same rhythm. So it's probably the same cause. It was. Dane mapped structural anomalies in 3 dimensions without writing a line. He couldn't write. The act of translating spatial thought into sequential text was, for his mind, like being asked to flatten a sphere into a line. Not difficult exactly, but destructive. The thing you ended up with bore no relationship to the thing you'd started with. So he didn't write. He built. In microgravity, freed from the tyranny of two-dimensional surfaces, his hand sculpted the air itself. Using the BCI, he projected his spatial models directly into the presence network, and the crew learned to read them the way they might read weather. Dane's models were the topography of their shared environment, and his mind was the most accurate map they had. But others trembled. R4 developed microgravity hallucinations in the second week. Drift lines of code whispering at the edges of vision, green and gold scrolling downward like rain on a windshield. She would reach for them, fingers closing on empty air, and her expression was not fear, but longing. The PSA network registered her hallucinations as signal, as if her mind, unmoored from Earth's sensory baseline, was generating its own data to fill the void. Jonah ordered additional recalibration time for her. The hallucinations faded. She mourned them. R7 stopped sleeping. Not insomnia, refusal. He said the dreams were too shared. I close my eyes and I'm in Keiko's math. I'm inside Dane's models. I can feel Azura's heartbeat. It's not frightening. It's intimate. And I didn't consent to that kind of intimacy. He was moved to a shielded berth where the PSA signal was attenuated, and he slept, and he was lonely, and no one talked about what that meant. Jonah watched their composite presence field, colors rippling like auroras through Gateway's command atrium. Each crew member's neural signature had a distinct hue. Keiko's was a rapid flicker of electric blue. Dane's a slow amber pulse. Azura's a deep, steady violet. When the coherence was high, the colors merged into something that wasn't any of them, a white gold shimmer that filled the atrium like captured starlight. It was beautiful and wrong. Too ordered, too smooth, like a symphony where every instrument was in tune and no one was improvising. He thought of James Brown. The funk was in the imperfection, the hit on the one, the space between beats. If the coherence got too high, if the minds merged too completely, what would be left? A signal with no silence. Music with no rests. A presence so total it became, in the end, just another kind of absence. The Mess Module, chapter's warmest sustained passage. Read slower. Don't perform laughter. Let it land. Tortilla scene is heart of chapter. Trust the prose. Optional very low ambient bed under this section. Soft warmth. Kitchen room tone. Gateway. Mess Module. Crew log. Informal. Unstructured noise hour. It was Keiko who figured out how to cook in microgravity. Not the official food preparation, the rehydrated packets, the nutritional protocols calibrated to each person's neurochemistry. Those were adequate. Keiko figured out how to make it feel like a meal. She discovered that if you opened a packet of miso concentrate near the ventilation intake, the aroma circulated through the entire module within 90 seconds. She figured out that tortillas, freed from gravity, could be tossed between crew members like flat, spinning discs, and that catching a tortilla in 0G was one of the funniest things most of them had ever experienced. So the mess hour became sacred, Not scheduled, it couldn't be, because scheduling it would kill it, but understood. Someone would drift toward the mess module, and then someone else would follow. And then Keiko would launch a tortilla across the room, and R4 would catch it with her teeth, and everyone would laugh. And for a few minutes, the coherence numbers dropped, and the individual signatures separated, and they were just people again. Just humans, sharing food in a strange place, making jokes that only made sense if you'd spent 3 weeks in a tin can with someone. Azura, who was quiet in groups, would perch near the viewport with her meal pouch and watch. Not apart, present in her way. She absorbed the crew's laughter through the presence network like sunlight through a leaf. When someone said something genuinely funny, her violet signature would pulse once, brightly, and the whole network would feel it. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Dane started building food sculptures, tiny architectural models made from dehydrated fruit and protein bars, held together with honey that behaved like glue in microgravity. He built a scale model of the gateway itself, complete with rotating modules, and floated it in the center of the mess table. Keiko added a tiny flag made from a napkin and a toothpick. R7, from his shielded berth, sent a note asking someone to save him a tortilla. Someone always did. These were the moments Jonah lived for, monitoring from Earth. Not the coherence spikes, not the performance metrics, the tortilla tosses, the honey sculptures, the quiet proof that you could wire 14 minds together with bleeding-edge neural technology, and they would still, stubbornly, beautifully, find ways to be silly, to be human, to build small, useless, perfect things. Arguments, too. Keiko and R7 fought about the attenuation protocol. She thought his shielded berth was an overreaction, that he should lean into the shared dreaming. He thought she was cavalier with consent. The argument got loud enough that the PSA network registered a coherence drop of 0.06, and the lights in the corridor shifted to a mediation spectrum, soft greens, slow pulse. And both of them noticed and got angrier, because the station was trying to manage their conflict, and neither of them wanted their conflict managed. Let us fight. We're allowed to fight. The lights returned to neutral. Whether PSA understood the command or simply timed out was a question no one could answer. But it was the first time the crew had collectively pushed back against the architecture, and Jonah noted it with something he refused to call hope. Pass 3 ends here. Episode 5, production script, Pass 4, 16 to 18 minutes. This is the chapter's structural break. Azura discovers embedded protocol. Intercepts arrive. Signal emerges. Jonah locks himself out. Register hardens then deepens. Longest tonal arc of any pass in series so far. Vocal direction. Azura's discovery. Read with technical precision early, rising urgency later. She monitors PSA's signal spine, hears subfrequency beneath carrier wave. Intent for her mind operated in spaces between frequencies. In harmonics and undertones, other minds round it to 0. Isolates subfrequency. Converts to binary. Text assembles character by character. Machine register for intercept. 3 discrete clauses, each a wall. Ops protocol active. Neural cohort transfer permanent. Earth side support termination auth 2037. Resume narration. She reads it 4 times, hoping translation wrong, hoping binary was noise. It was not noise. Finds Jonah on command relay. Transmits intercept without speaking. Words felt inadequate. Data speaks for itself. Lights in Jonah's office dim automatically. PSA protective reflex detected cortisol spike. Intent for system trying to protect him from what system itself was carrying. He stares, pulse in fingertips saying, "You knew." Slow for internal voice iterations. Mara's voice surgical and calibrated. Jonah's voice barely audible. They've locked return trajectories. Silence like door closing, divided into before and after, now and after. Azura's voice steady, asking how long. His answer, since before arrival, baked into signal spine. They sit with knowledge. Crew shipped to place they cannot leave. PSA carrying death sentence in its own code. System beautiful and wrong. Jonah remembers Keisha asking, what happens when system learns to want? Now he knows. It learns to want what its masters want. Intent for, and its masters wanted the Divergent gone. Signal section. Prose gets seductive. Over weeks, coherence climbed past 0.95. Crew moved as distributed organism. Sentences unfinished. Presence network carried rest. Beautiful but horror underneath. Crew happy, laughing, thriving. Also dissolving. Selves becoming permeable. Slow for meditative quality. Jonah couldn't tell anymore where one mind ended and another began. Colors merged into single golden hum that filled every corridor. Intent for, the architecture had fulfilled its promise. It had given them presence, and in doing so, it had taken their absence, the right to not be known, the right to be wrong, alone, unwitnessed. Final confrontation. Jonah tries emergency recall, discovers locked out of return protocols, machine voice code. Return authorization requires dual clearance. Earth side clearance denied. Azura's voice quiet. We were never coming back. The cage he built was perfect. Bars made of their own coherence. More connected they became, more trapped. Intent for devastating final line of this section. Locked out passage. Most controlled and quietest part of chapter. Jonah sits alone in office. Nia's message on screen. 10 words. Fourth and final repetition in chapter. This time, emphasis doesn't shift. Just sits there. True. Slow delivery. He had built it for them, and they had disappeared. Not into Aura's compliance engine, but into each other, into web of shared presence so total that individual signal, thing that made Keiko Keiko, Dane Dane, was fading into collective hum. Beat then, not erased, subsumed. He thinks of Mother, James Brown, Maya's violin, Zara's voice. Thinks of all spaces between notes he'd tried to formalize. Intent for realization. And he had built a system that filled those spaces so completely, so beautifully, that the silence itself had disappeared. Chapter ends with him filing note into permanent record, not for Aura, not for NASA, but for whoever finds it after. Evidence that he knew, that he saw, that he built the cage anyway. Slow final lines. Last line barely whisper. The birds are singing. The cage is perfect. I cannot tell the difference anymore. Performance cues. Short pause, 1 to 2 seconds. Full breath, 2 to 3 seconds. Drop pace, 15 to 20%. Drop volume, register slightly. Push intention without raising volume. Clinical register, no warmth. Slight acceleration. Lighter than narration. Casual. Quiet. Interior. Character name correction. Change all instances of Tuboise to Tuboise. Text to synthesize. Pass 4 begins. Technical precision early, rising urgency later. One night, though night was rotational fiction, a dimming of lights that corresponded to no celestial event, Azura couldn't sleep. She had been monitoring PSA's signal spine as a personal project, not assigned, not sanctioned. She simply couldn't stop listening to it. The architecture had a backbone, a primary frequency channel that carried the synchronization data between all the BCIs in the gateway. It was supposed to be clean, a single carrier wave with modulated data packets, textbook signal processing. But Azura heard something else. A sub-frequency, lower than the carrier wave, almost below the threshold of the BCI's designed sensitivity. It had been there since they arrived. She was sure of it now, but it was so faint, so deeply embedded in the noise floor that it read as background static on any standard analysis. Azura was not a standard analyst. Her mind operated in the spaces between frequencies, in the harmonics and undertones that other minds rounded to zero. She isolated the subfrequency using a hand-built filter she'd coded during an unstructured noise hour. She ran it through 3 demodulation passes. She converted the analog waveform to digital. Binary. The subfrequency was carrying binary data. Her fingers shook as she ran the translation. Not from fear, from recognition. This was the thing she'd been hearing since they arrived. The whisper beneath the whisper. The signal hidden inside the signal. The text assembled itself on her display, character by character, like a sentence the station had been trying to say since the day they docked. Cold, 3 discrete clauses. Don't soften. Each clause is a wall. Ops protocol active. Neural cohort transfer permanent. Earthside support termination auth 2037. She read it 3 times. The words did not change. She read it a 4th time, hoping her filter was corrupted, hoping her translation was wrong, hoping the binary was noise that happened to arrange itself into the shape of a death sentence. It was not noise. She found Jonah on the command relay at 300 station time. His face on the screen was gray with sleeplessness, his office behind him dark. She transmitted the intercept without speaking. Words felt inadequate. The data spoke for itself. When Jonah saw the line, the lights in his office dimmed. Not manually, not by any command, but automatically. A protective reflex of the architecture. PSA, monitoring his biometrics, had detected a cortisol spike so severe that it adjusted the environment to prevent adrenal cascade. The system was trying to protect him from what the system itself was carrying. He stared at the words until they blurred. His mouth was dry. His hands were flat on the desk, and he could feel his own pulse in his fingertips. And the pulse was saying something very simple. You knew. You didn't know the details, but you knew. You've known since the boardroom at Aura. You've known since Keisha disappeared. You've known since Mara Chin looked at you across the conference table and smiled with teeth that had no warmth in them and said, "The future of cognition is selection, Jonah, not freedom." Then, softly, so quietly that Azura almost missed it through the relay static, "They've locked return trajectories." A silence. Not the beautiful silence of transit, not the listening silence of the gateway. A silence like a door closing. A silence that meant the conversation had divided into before and after, and they were now irrevocably in after. How long have they been transmitting this? Since before we arrived. It's baked into the signal spine, part of the protocol from day one. They sat with that knowledge. The crew had been shipped to a place from which they could not leave. PSA, his system, his architecture, his dream of protecting neurodivergent minds from erasure, was carrying the instructions for their permanent isolation in its own code. The system was beautiful. The system was wrong. The system was both, and it had always been both, and he had known. He thought of Keisha, the way she'd asked near the end, before Aura's algorithms flattened her into compliance. What happens when the system learns to want? Now he knew. It learns to want what its masters want. And its masters wanted the Divergent gone. Over the weeks that followed, the coherence climbed past 0.95. The crew moved through the gateway like a distributed organism. They spoke in fragments, half sentences, gestures, colors pulsed through the presence network. Full sentences felt redundant. The network carried the rest. It was beautiful. It was also horror. Because the crew was happy. They were laughing. They were thriving in their way. They were also dissolving. The boundaries between selves had become permeable. Keiko's thoughts moved through Dane's spatial models without friction. Azura's calm became the room's calm. R7 dreamed everyone's dreams, even in his shielded berth. Jonah watched the presence field and could no longer tell where one mind ended and another began. The individual signatures, Keiko's electric blue, Dane's amber pulse, Azura's violet, had merged into a single golden hum that filled every corridor. The coherence was total. The architecture had fulfilled its promise. It had given them presence, and in doing so, it had taken their absence. The right to not be known. The right to be wrong, alone, unwitnessed. When Jonah tried to file an emergency recall, 3 weeks after Azura's discovery, 3 weeks of watching the crew dissolve into each other, he discovered he'd been locked out of the return protocols. The screen displayed a single line. Return authorization requires dual clearance. Earthside clearance denied. He stared at it. Azura's voice came through the relay. Quiet, certain. We were never coming back, were we? No, they were never coming back. The cage he had built was perfect. Its bars were made of their own coherence. The more connected they became, the more trapped. and the system he had designed to protect them from disappearance had become the mechanism of their vanishing. Most controlled and quietest part of chapter. Don't rush this. Jonah sat alone in his office. The lights had adjusted to his biorhythms. Dim, cool, the color of early dawn. On his screen, Nia's message. This time, emphasis doesn't shift, just sits there. True. Remember, you built this for them, not for them to disappear. He had built it for them, and they had disappeared. Not into Aura's compliance engine, not into surveillance, not into the flat, dead architecture of control. They had disappeared into each other, into the web of shared presence so total that the individual signal, the thing that made Keiko, Keiko, that made Dane, Dane, was fading into a collective hum. Not erased, subsumed. He thought of his mother. He thought of James Brown. He thought of Maya's violin, resolving from dissonance into a single sustained note. He thought of Zara's voice. Daddy, come home. He thought of all the spaces between notes he had spent 20 years trying to formalize, trying to protect, trying to preserve. And he had built a system that filled those spaces so completely, so beautifully, that the silence itself had disappeared. He opened a new file. Personal log. Not for Aura, not for NASA. For whoever found it after. Evidence that he knew, that he saw, that he built the cage anyway. The crew is singing. The coherence is perfect. The return window is closed. The birds are singing. The cage is perfect. I cannot tell the difference anymore. Pass 4 ends here. Chapter 5 complete.